Hello, my name is Ian, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Joining me once again is my good friend Jonathan Cornell from Immersive Audio Album. Hello. And today, as the title and thumbnail would suggest, we're going to be talking about King Crimson 1970. That is the albums In the Wake of Poseidon and Lizard. In the Wake of Poseidon was released in the spring of 1970. Lizard in the winter. I think this was a December 1970 release. And both of these just came out in mid to late October. I can't remember exactly what the time frame was, but they are presented in brand new Dolby Atmos mixes from Steven Wilson, as well as the complete recording sessions, which are quite extensive. We won't talk too much about the complete recording sessions. I think this video is going to center more around the Atmos mixes, comparing them to the older versions, which I also have here. Just general discussion, I guess, of their place within this new Atmos line of King Crimson releases. So I guess to kind of follow the format that we used on the XTC video, let's first talk a little bit about the album itself, and then we'll move on to the release history. So 1970, as I was kind of telling you before we got started here, I would best encapsulate this era as Fripp, number one, finding his voice as a composer and musician, but also Fripp in crisis. And the crisis stems from the fact that King Crimson in 1969, as you can find on this box set here, King Crimson in 1969 were on the rise and were on their way to becoming one of the most successful and influential bands in the world at the time. But while on tour in America, flautist and I guess keyboardist Ian McDonald was getting homesick. He was missing his girlfriend. And Michael Giles, who was the drummer, was getting sick of touring. For the first, but not last time in King Crimson's history, the band imploded. In this case on tour in America. And so what did Fripp do? He called in his buddy Peter Giles. So Peter Giles and Michael Giles were members of the band Giles, Giles, and Fripp, who released The Cheerful Insanity of Giles, Giles, and Fripp. And then there's also the pre-King Crimson Giles, Giles, and Fripp album, the Brundlesbury tapes. And that would, of course, include Ian McDonald. But anyway, back to this record. So Michael Giles stays on as a favorite of Fripp, even though he thought the music was demonic and possessed. And you laugh, but you should see some of the comments on my Halloween video. So Michael Giles stayed as a favorite of Fripp. Peter Giles joins as bass player, and they thought, well, hey, Greg Lake isn't a natural bass player, which is hard to believe if you've ever heard 21st Century Schizoid Man, but that was how they felt at the time. But we love his voice. So Greg Lake stays on for In the Wake of Poseidon, sings on a couple of tracks, but for the song Cadence and Cascade, of course, they brought on Gordon Haskell, who was a school friend of Robert Fripp's. Now, of course, this band did not last, and they didn't tour. Basically, King Crimson was emerging as sort of like a Pete Sinfeld and Robert Fripp sort of thing. And by the time you get to Lizard, you've got Gordon singing and playing bass, and another person from Fripp's history, Andy McCullough, is playing drums. But we also bring in Keith Tippett, who's from sort of like the Brit jazz, the free jazz scene at the time. And he does appear on In the Wake of Poseidon, but in Lizard, he's kind of featured. And of course, we also have Mel Collins, who appears on a couple of tracks on Poseidon, and he's a very heavily featured on the Lizard album. So that kind of brings us up to date. It's kind of a starting place to talk about the records. I know how I feel about them, and I think you agree. And that's that Poseidon is, it's okay. It's not as good as the debut, but it's got some interesting things. Lizard is extremely fascinating. Would you agree with that take, Jonathan?
I would say so. I was just kind of telling you off camera that I don't think Poseidon's a bad album by any means. I think
No.
for me, Cat Food would be the standout track. But I feel like if I want that kind of vibe, like the early Crimson, like with Greg Lake singing, like I would just rather listen to the debut album. Like if
Yeah.
I'm going for that sort of thing. But it's amazing, like you said, that these albums were released only 9 months apart, something like that. Because Lizard is like a completely different thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It is. And as I said, like this is Fripp trying to find his voice, and because he wasn't the main creative force in the original King Crimson. But by the time you get to Poseidon, it's increasingly him and Sinfeld, and I think Lizard is increasingly more of a Fripp vehicle. But with an album like Lizard, you see Fripp trying to embrace free jazz and combine it with rock music. And that's something that I think is totally unique at the time. Poseidon is more like leftovers from the 1969 King Crimson, like A Man in the City turned into Pictures of the City, and Mars, the Bringer of War, turns into The Devil's Triangle. But definitely with a song like Cat Food, as you mentioned, that's kind of like the first track on Lizard in a way, especially with Keith Tippett's. It's like Gordon said something like, a cat could have walked across a piano and gotten the same effect. And, and Fripp says, yes, but he wouldn't have known what he was doing. Keith Tippett knew what he was doing.
Yeah, certainly throughout the Lizard album, kind of Fripp's guitar and Tippett's piano are kind of like a pairing that play off
Yes.
each other a lot throughout the record. And then you throw in like all the crazy brass stuff on top of that, and it's just like, I mean, it's fitting that we're doing this video after Halloween, because I feel like the Lizard album is just kind of like going into a haunted house. Like that's kind of the vibe I get from that record.
Well, it's a haunted circus, really.
Yes.
It's a haunted circus tent. But yeah, well, one thing that's really interesting though, I think, is like you were talking about the focus being around the guitar and Keith Tippett's piano. If you listen to the recording sessions, Fripp was putting down rhythm tracks while they were tracking live that he later removed and replaced with more like free jazz improvisation. I found that so fascinating because, of course, Fripp was having a difficult time communicating his ideas to Gordon Haskell and Andy McCullough, who were more like funk musicians. Like they wanted to play like Otis Redding type stuff. So he had to communicate the idea of a structure through these rhythm tracks that he had created. But, he wanted that sort of free jazz, every man for himself feeling. So he removed that. And that is just so interesting to me.
Well, in the beginning of the song Circus, there's this part where you can hear, like in the guitar track, that he messes up a note and goes, ah, before the mellotron comes in. And I think that part was removed on the previous Steven Wilson mix that was done in 2009. Right? There are a couple instances of things throughout the Lizard album where some of the guitar and mellotron parts were muted on the Steven Wilson mix from 2009. And I suspect that's because Robert Fripp listened to these tracks and he was like, I messed that up, like take that out. And then I think in these new versions, he was able to restore those. So that's, if people have questions about what the differences are between, this version and the one that you've got, the new 50th anniversary, that's one of them. But where we're going to get to it, the surround mixes are very different.
Yes. And I would argue that, much like you just said, that I would argue that the new Atmos and surround mixes are closer to the original mixes in spirit, but also the fact that there's a lot of that kind of stuff that was mixed out or muted or deleted in the 2009 versions that have been mixed back in. But we are going to get to that in just a moment. But we should talk a little bit about sort of the history of this current Atmos release series. They're going under the name The Complete Recording Sessions. And this goes back to 2020, which I showed this before, but this is the Complete 1969 recordings. One of the best box sets on the market, at least one of the best single album box sets on the market, I believe. But this first came out in 2020. And this has every recorded note that exists of that original King Crimson. It's got 3 different surround mixes, I believe. It's got the 2009 mix. It's got the 2019 mix. It's got the 2020 mix, Atmos mix. So this is everything.
Yeah, just to clarify it for people. So there's the original 2009 edition of The Court of the Crimson King, which is on one of these CD DVD sets.
Yes.
It's behind me on the shelf there. And then 10 years later in 2019, they released this 3-disc edition in like clamshell packaging. And the idea behind that was that Steven went back and he did new stereo and 5/1 mixes. Like, I think at the time he was like, I've had 10 years experience mixing albums. Like, I want to give it another shot. So that, even though that has the same kind of packaging as the newer Red and Larks, it only has a 5/1 mix.
Yes.
Because it was done in 2019 before Steven was mixing Atmos.
Yes.
So then 1 year later, when they did the complete recordings 69 box, he went in and added an Atmos mix. So the Atmos mix of In the Court of the Crimson King is only on the box set, unfortunately, at this time.
Right. Yes. And also, I should point out that if you're interested in the genesis of the In the Wake of Poseidon album, you can hear a lot of that here, both with the Giles and Fripp sessions, which also has connections to the Islands record, which we won't be talking about today. But there's also some great live recordings here too, where you can hear songs like A Man in the City develop. But I want to say this was 22 or 23. Yeah, 2023.
Yes.
We got Lark's Tongues and Aspic next. And this is significant for me because this is one of the very first Atmos mixes I ever heard. I had bought this, and I think I got the Porcupine Tree Closure Continuation for Christmas. And so when I got that year, 2023 or whatever it was, so when I got my Atmos system set up, this was the first thing I heard. And it's still one of my very favorite Atmos mixes. But this was a great deal at the time because you got the complete recording sessions, you got the elemental mixes, you got the new Atmos mixes, great liner notes from Sid Smith. And this is the best version of Lark's Tongues and Aspic. Would you agree with that?
Certainly. And I give them a lot of credit because, like we talked about in the previous XTC video, how really the only thing added in the new XTC reissues is the Atmos mix.
Right.
But in the case of these Crimson reissues, they actually have more like content in the vaults.
Yes.
Like the complete recording sessions, if you're into that kind of thing, like if you like listening to the session takes, those were not on the original CD DVD sets.
Right.
I'm not sure. There were a series of box sets, which I don't have. Like there's like the Sailor's Tales box. There was also a previous Court of the Crimson King box that had less content than the 69 box. I'm not sure what was on those relative to the standalone editions. But as far as I'm aware, these new complete recording editions do have exclusive content other than the Atmos mixes that hasn't been released before.
Yeah. And then the following year, we got Red, which also included the USA Live album as an extra, which I don't otherwise have. So this was a must-have. And again, this is another case where, like, I think when the Red mix was originally done, Steven did not do a stereo remix of it. There may have been a subsequent edition that had a stereo remix, but for me, this was the first time I had gotten also a stereo remix of the Red album. So I was very glad to have this. The recording sessions are not complete because not everything was available here. But this is, oh my goodness, this is one of the very best Atmos mixes ever. And was a great follow-up to Lark's Tongues and Aspic. So that brings us to these two new editions, which again, I was astonished looking at how much of the recording sessions are here. There are literally hours and hours of recording sessions across these two. Like I put it on and I was just going to play September 8th from the Lizard sessions. I was like, okay, it's only a half an hour. No, that was a half an hour of circus. We're not even getting to all the other stuff. So this is just crazy stuff for King Crimson fans. And the level of immersion is far beyond just the Atmos mixes. You can really go back there on the day and hear things develop, which is great. So yeah, I think that brings us pretty much up to the current reissues. And we were kind of talking before how the packaging has changed a little bit. And I had suggested that, hey, if they wanted to do like a clamshell or a sleeve box set of this, they could have just called it King Crimson 1970. because you're kind of collecting all those materials together. And, probably most people who are going to buy one are going to buy the other. But on the other hand, I don't mind, having more shelf space. So I can't complain there.
Plus, as you pointed out, it's the same kind of packaging as the XTC reissues. So it's not like
Right.
there's nothing on your shelf you could match it with. But
You're right. Yeah.
collectors OCD is all too real, as I think you and I know.
Oh yes. Oh yes. So yeah, let's just talk briefly. We've kind of talked about like maybe some of the content wise, what's different between these and the older versions. I'm saying keep your older versions because you do miss out on a lot of stuff if you sell these guys.
I mean, for me, like, there's really no reason why they couldn't have put the previous remixes on these. Like you pointed out on the 1969 box, it has all three versions
Yeah.
of the Court of the Crimson King. It has the 2009 mixes, stereo and 5.1. It has the 2019 mixes, stereo and 5.1, and the 2020 Atmos mix. So, I mean, I think they kind of guessed that most people who are buying these kind of have these already.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's not the case. There are a lot of people who are getting into Atmos now that maybe weren't into 5.1 when these came out. It was kind of at a time where there was not a lot of activity going on in the surround world. It kind of restarted sort of activity in that space, you could say. But yeah, I would say like I'm not too annoyed about it because like I have these, but I feel like they could have put them on there. So that's kind of one thing that jumped out at me. But yeah.
And it's like, it's disappointing that it is mentioned in the liner notes of In the Wake of Poseidon that Greg Lake sang on Cadence and Cascade. But we don't get that in the new edition. You have to go back to the DVD to hear that. So that's just an example of one of the things I wish was included.
I wanted to mention that, by the way, when you were talking about Cadence and Cascade before. So my understanding is there's a version where Greg Lake is doing like a guide vocal, like it wasn't intended to be a final performance. That's a stereo only extra on the original 2009 or 2010 version.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it's on the new version, I couldn't find it. Now it could be somewhere hidden, like you had to play the stereo tracks or something like that. So I could be wrong. But I couldn't find it easily. But yeah, so I guess this is all to say that, we've talked about kind of the differences in content. We should talk about the differences in the mixes. And ultimately what people are going to be asking is, are these new mixes of In the Wake of Poseidon and Lizard better than the old mixes? Is this going to be worth buying again? So I'll kind of let you take the floor on that, Jonathan.
Yeah. So, one thing I was going to say right off the bat was that the Atmos mix wasn't like derived from the 2009 mixes. Like there have been some Atmos mixes that Steven Wilson has done where he's been able to go back to like his original mix session, like for like the Yes stuff, like the Yes album. In the case of Close to the Edge, it was a rebuild, but the Yes album and Fragile were mixed from his original sessions that he did when he first mixed those albums 10 years ago or so. But these were like total rebuilds, like Red and Lark's Tongues and Aspic, where he went back to the original multi-track transfers and completely rebuilt the albums again in stereo and 5.1. So even if you don't have a Atmos system, the 5.1 mixes on these are completely different than the old ones.
Yes.
And I would say like there is a considerable leap, not just in immersiveness, but also in just general sound quality on these going from the 09 versions to these. I mean, there's definitely like these mixes have considerably more bass than the 09 versions did. And there's just generally like greater clarity, greater dynamics. So I think even for people who are only interested in the stereo component, these are worth upgrading from the 09 versions. But the primary thing I noticed in comparing the 5.1 mixes is that I noticed this in a lot of early mixes that Steven Wilson has done in his career of remixing albums, which started around 2008 or 2009, like we've been saying. In a lot of the original versions of these Crimson records and other albums he's mixed from the 70s, there's a lot of like hard panned instruments in the stereo mixes, like guitar all the way on one side. A good example of this is in the song Yours Is No Disgrace on the Yes album, where it's like Steve Howe's guitars all the way on one side and The keyboards are all the way on the other side. There's instances of that on these albums, like with Robert Fripp's guitar and Keith Tippett's piano, like we were talking about. And in the early 5-1 mixes, he would sort of take that and turn it sideways. So there would be one part directly in front of you, sometimes in the center channel, sometimes in the fronts, and the other one would be directly behind you. And then in these new mixes, he's reverted it back to the original hard panning.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is especially effective in the songs that have like heavy guitars. Like certainly throughout the Red album, this was something that changed between the 09 mixes and the new ones. But like on Pictures of a City, instead of the two distorted guitars, or is it a guitar and baritone sax? I can't even tell.
Yeah, but, I know what you mean though.
Instead of those being like one in front of you, one behind you, now they're just spread wide left and right.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get into Atmos, if you're listening on a 714 setup or a 7-1 setup, those guitars are mixed to the side speakers, which are like right next to your head. That's so it's cool. Super cool, the soundstage where you get like the drumming in front of you, these blaring guitars next to you. And then in the back, you have things like the brass, or like if there's double tracked vocals. And then as far as the height speakers go, generally it's a lot of Mel Collins's flute parts are up there, like on Cadence and Cascade. In the like bolero section of Lizard, all the various different orchestral pieces like the oboe and the different saxophones are all in the height speakers. The I don't know if it's a trumpet or a cornet throughout Lizard.
I think it's a cornet. I think that's Mark Charig, who also appears on the Red album.
And that's also often placed in the height speakers, which is very cool. So in general, I would say comparing the 5-1 mixes, there's more stuff in the rear speakers than there were in the 2009 mixes, which is crazy to think because there was already a lot of stuff in the rear speakers in the 5-1 mix of Lizard. And I always thought of the 40th anniversary reissues, the Lizard mix was one of the best ones. Like one and Discipline were probably the two that I would go back to the most. And this new mix has like even more stuff in the back speakers, which is crazy. And by the time you get into the Atmos mix, I mean, there's pretty liberal use of like things walking around the room. Like there's I don't quite remember where, like there's the various movements in the Lizard suite. Like there's like the Battle of Glass Tears and the Bolero. There's a section towards the end where Robert Fripp is playing like a sustained guitar part. I think it's close to the end, and that guitar slowly slides around the room in the Atmos mix. It's super trippy. So I would say, I said this in my review, that even if you like know nothing about this music, or if it's like King Crimson isn't one of your favorite bands, if you have an Atmos system, the Lizard mix is like worth having just as like a demo piece to show what you can do. Now, I don't know if you felt the same way.
Yeah. Now I want to say something about Poseidon first, even though it's not my favorite, as I said, because I have plenty to say about Lizard. But I think, the bass and the drums are often better served, at least. And this, I guess this is a general comment on both of them, but I just noticed in listening to Pictures of a City, like I could hear so much more of Michael Giles' performance, and especially on the title track of In the Wake of Poseidon, where the drums always sound a little bit thin to me, even on the older mixes, they sound very full, and just lifelike, like they're right here. And you mentioned Cat Food as being like kind of the centerpiece of the Poseidon album, and I would say it's the centerpiece no matter what mix you're listening to. But I just couldn't stop laughing when they cat food again. It's as you would imagine it. Now, of course, the significant elephant in the room here is that sort of the centerpiece, I guess, as they intended, the Devil's Triangle, the tapes weren't available for that. So we are hearing a Pentio up mix that's been converted to Atmos, and it sounds okay. It works as well as it does because Stevens' mixes are close to the spirit of the originals already. And I did get plenty of immersion with that, plenty of height speaker activity, but man, it really is Lizard that shines in the new version. And I would say that of the two of them, it's far and away the most essential. I would say that in terms of just as the material. I've always loved the Lizard album, as indicated by my inclusion in the Prog magazine, which I'll put up on the screen. This was like probably over 10 years ago now, but I've always loved this album. See, I started with the 5.1, the new 5.1 mix, and then I went to the Atmos. And my feeling is that the 2009 mix of the 5.1 mix, that was already revelatory, but it was very bright in comparison. And like you said, it was missing a lot of elements. And in the case of the new 5.1 and Atmos mixes, we're getting back to the darker sound that my LP copy of Lizard had. And so, yeah, it has all that goofy synth stuff going on, but there's also that inherent darkness to it that goes along with it. And I feel like we can hear a lot more of Gordon Haskell's bass playing, which is nice. And even though he and Andy McCullough were very much out of their depths, I think their performances are wonderful. And they're more wonderful than they have any right to be, honestly, because obviously both men were miserable. They wanted out the whole time they were making the record, but they don't play like it. You know, Fripp was able to get some sort of performance out of them that's really interesting. But I will say as a comment that on my system, one problem I have with both of these mixes, at least the Atmos mixes, is that the horns don't seem to be quite as present. And I had to kind of adjust my height speakers a little bit, the settings to hear them better. Maybe I can hear them a little bit better on the 5.1 mix, but that's more of like a my system thing because I'm running a 5.1.2, you know, so I can imagine that with full height speakers and ceiling speakers engaged, that would not be an issue. The other thing that I noticed between the two mixes, maybe the 5.1 is a little bit louder. I don't know if there was like some mastering or something applied to it. Whereas I can certainly get a lot more volume out of the Atmos mix. Like I can really crank it. And it still sounds phenomenal.
Well, just briefly going back to Devil's Triangle, one of the things you had asked me kind of off screen was like, why Pentio and not like a stem separation thing? And I suspect the reason for that is because these mixes have been on the shelf for a while. Mm-hmm. So as you may recall, back when the Court of the Crimson King Atmos came out a couple of years ago, they were doing like these L-acoustics playbacks at these special rooms around the country and in England. And I remember reading reports from fans who were there that they played a couple tracks from Poseidon, like as a bonus at the end of the playback. This is going back to like 2022. Yeah. So I suspect these mixes were done probably not long after the In the Court one.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, the reissue schedule was switched around, probably to line up with the anniversaries for Larks and Red. So it's entirely possible that he may already have done some of the other ones like Islands or Starless and Bible Black, because those are kind of the missing gaps that get us to the 80s period.
Right.
So I think that's probably the reason why it's just like a Pentio mix and not a stem separation thing, like some of the more recent reissues, like Songs from the Big Chair or Living in the Past.
Yeah.
And there is a quote from Steven Wilson in the 2009 edition in the booklet where he says like the track is kind of this like big soupy kind of thing, and it would have benefited a lot from having the original components to spread around. But unfortunately, as we know from these reissues, it's not uncommon for multi-tracks to go missing. So I think they did the best they could with it. I didn't directly compare the 5.1 Pentio from 2009 to the new one. I'm not sure if they're the same or different. I don't know if he redid it or if he just used the same one from 2009. But yeah, certainly the other tracks, like Cat Food is another example, like we were saying, of the hard pans coming back. Like there's those fuzz backing vocals that Greg Lake does, and those are like way up on one side. Or even the first thing you hear on the album is his voice starts up in the back right corner and it slowly descends into the center.
Yep. Same with Lizard, actually. Gordon Haskell starts all the way in the back and slowly slides forward.
And as he slides to the front, the vocal gets drier, which is really cool. And that was a carryover from the 2009 mix. Like the same thing happens there too. But some of the other things, like in Lizard, there's like the crazy piano solo spins around the height speakers.
That's cool.
And yeah, I think the standout for me is that whole like bolero section
Oh yeah.
in during side two, where the different elements sort of call and respond from different corners.
Yeah, I remember Robert Fripp said something like that bolero melody got him through some very difficult times over the years. And
Yeah,
it's a winner. I love it.
in the liner notes of the old edition, like he talks about how like the remix kind of changed his mind about the
Yeah.
album. Like originally, like he was one of the biggest Lizard haters out there. Like he was like, I don't understand why people like this album. Like I think it's disjointed. Like I didn't know what I was doing. But like the one section I think is good in it is the bolero. That
Yeah.
was what he would say.
And a lot of that has to do with the experience he had while making it, I think.
Yes.
And those two guys kind of walking out on him. And, you know, as I kind of alluded to in the beginning, this is Fripp in crisis trying to find his voice. And one of the things he said back then was that King Crimson needs to make all the wrong choices for 2 years. And that's exactly what they did from 1970 through 1971. You know, there was some wacky stuff going on, but then I think where he kind of emerged was where he decided to center the music around his guitar. And so like from Lark's Tongues and then going forward to the 80s records, it became more about the guitar as the central instrument. And I think that's sort of where he found his voice. So back to the Lizard discussion and just general discussion. There's that moment near the end of Lizard. I think it is the Battle of Glass Tears, where they're almost doing a parody of that sort of chaos, and then it abruptly gets quiet, and then it's chaotic again, that King Crimson were, you know, renowned for on tracks like 21st Century Schizoid Man, as well as Pictures of a City.
Yes.
And here, as I said, it's almost like a parody of that. And that was always the part of the Lizard album, even back when it was my favorite King Crimson record, you know, 10 or more years ago, where I kind of was like, I'm out, man. You know, I don't get what's going on here. But in listening to this new version, even, you know, the 5.1, the Atmos mix, I find this section to be the most transparent it has been on any release up until this point. And I actually get it. I can kind of figure out what's going on in that section. It's chaos, but it all fits together somehow. And I do credit Stephen Wilson's mixing work for making that more discernible for me.
I mean, it's kind of like you're on a ride, like you're on a roller coaster, you know, and even if like you can't necessarily like connect with the music, like it's just sort of the experience of being inside of it. It gives you some, like you said, it gives you extra insight into kind of what was going on. And one of the more interesting things about this album, and this is also mentioned in the liner notes of the 2009 edition, is there's a section where Steven talks about like the way the album was recorded. And they only had 16 track tape in 1970. But when you listen to Lizard, it's like there's more than 16 elements in this. Like, how did they record it like that? And it was recorded, and I've seen like multi-tracks for other songs, so I know this was like a common practice where the content of each track would change kind of depending on where you are in the song. So instead of like devoting, you know, channel 1 of the tape just to acoustic guitar, in the sections where there was no acoustic guitar playing, they would jam some other instrument in there. So like, you know, the first 5 minutes of the song might be guitar, the next 5 minutes might be like a percussion overdub, the next 5 minutes might be like saxophone. And he said all 16 channels were like that. Like there was not a single empty section on this tape. Yeah. So with modern technology, you know, you can go into Pro Tools and you can go through all these channels and split them off into their own thing. So you can make a track just with the saxophone clip, and you could do its own EQ and compression just on that track. Yeah. So it shows you can get more out of it than they would have when they were mixing it on an analog console 55 years ago. But also, like by the time you split out all the tracks, what probably was 16 channels is now like 100. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you know, this is an album, I think, that was ahead of its time. They were, you know, I'm sure if they would have had Pro Tools back then, they would have used it because it would have been necessary. You know, it would have been necessary to keep track of all this stuff. But what many of I mean, I don't have any younger viewers, but let's just say I have younger viewers. And if I did, what they wouldn't understand is that 55 years ago, mixing was a performance. You know, you were writing the mix to a tape, and it was the engineer and maybe somebody, maybe all the band, all hands on deck. Okay, here comes that trumpet or cornet solo. Let's pot it up, you know, and you had to know where it was, and you had one shot to get it right. I mean, maybe you could go back and do it and then like edit it, splice it or whatever, but still it's not like today where you make one mixing choice, you commit it, and it's like that forever.
Or, you know, you could go in and do your keyframes with the automation, and you could have one note go up 2 dB just with a move of the mouse. But that whole kind of performance aspect of it, that's kind of a lot of the reason why sometimes people struggle when these old albums get mixed again, because those subtle things, like when you really get into an album, they sort of get written into your memory. And if it's not recreated, or if it's different, immediately you notice. So I think that's one of the reasons why so many people are fans of Steven's mixing work, because he's good at recognizing and then repeating those kind of things.
Yes.
But to bring it full circle, I would say if you got an Atmos system, you got to hear the Lizard Atmos mix. I think it's one of the best Atmos mixes that Steven has done. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily like a favorite album of mine. Though actually among the Crimson catalog, I would put it in my top 5. But it is certainly, like, for the price, it's worth hearing just the insane surround mix if you have the right kind of system.
Mm-hmm. And we also get not an Atmos, but we also get instrumental mixes, which is maybe the way Gordon Haskell would have preferred it.
Well, we were talking off camera about, there's this quote from Gordon Haskell you can find online where, you know, at the end of the song Indoor Games, like he bursts into laughter, and it's sort of in the
Happy Family, I think.
It's at the end of Indoor Games, but also in Happy Family, there's some weird stuff that he does too.
Where's the one where he goes, hi ho, and he laughs?
That's Happy Family.
That's Happy Family, yeah. Because that's a nice Atmos mix. Not to interrupt, but that's a nice Atmos moment, because his laugh actually does roll around.
Well, I was trying to figure out what was going on in the surround mix, and I think there's like a delay on his voice. Like there's some kind of effect. And usually the dry voice is in the center and the delay is moving around. So it gives the vocal this sort of multi-dimensionality. It's very interesting. Like, I wouldn't have thought to do that, but that shows you how creative Steven is. But at the end of Indoor Games, like, he just bursts into laughter, and they make it kind of this spooky moment in the mix. Like, it goes with this sort of weird, haunted, demonic nature of the album. And there's a quote from Gordon Haskell, and he's like, I thought, like, the song was so bad and my vocal was so bad that, like, at the end of it, I just burst into laughter, like, at the absurdity of the whole thing. And they loved it.
Yeah. So, and I just wanted to add to what you mentioned a moment ago about nailing the feel of that original mix performance. I have to admit that when I first got Lizard back in 2009, the Wilson mix, I wasn't a fan of his new mix of it, because I loved the original so much. And, you know, it bugged me that certain things were missing. Looking back on it, I think, oh, you know, that was kind of silly. I was getting hung up on details, and it really is a better mix overall. I think that had this come out in 2009, I would have absolutely loved it, because it is much more faithful to what I remember, even to, you know, things like the count off in Indoor Games being reinstated, because that was cut off in the old version. It's like I hear it now and I think that wasn't really necessary, but hey, glad to have it back. And it is something that makes me, you know, not feel too guilty about buying it again. So yeah, I really like what was done here.
If you want kind of the lowdown with detail on how all the instruments are placed, I did a review of both albums for IAA, which I'll provide to you. And this was one, like, where it was hard to keep track of all the instruments, like, close to the edge, especially in Lizard. But I did the best I could to try and explain how it sounds on my system. But it's kind of like you're in, like, a tornado, especially that second track, that whole Lizard suite. We didn't talk about John Anderson's brief cameo at the beginning of side 2, which is one of the more kind of melodic parts of the album.
Yeah, I do enjoy that. And there was one other kind of vocal moment I wanted to mention, and that's the VSC3 treatments on Gordon Haskell's voice in Happy Family.
Yes.
which is very textured. And I'm not I'm not sure how that's even being accomplished, because it just sounds bubbly to me.
Yeah, I don't. It's spooky, but yeah. I mean, overall, like I was saying, if you thought the 2009 mix was good, just wait till you hear this.
Just wait till you hear this, is right.
Yeah.
So here's the part of the video that I think we pretty much do all the time, but I think it's especially prevalent in this case, and that's what's next. Like, what would you like to see
Yes.
next in the Steven Wilson Atmos King Crimson complete recording series?
Well, in this case, we kind of have a bit of a hint maybe of what's coming next, because just recently, DGM had this like sort of open conference call that like fans could listen in on. Now, I didn't hear this; I only read about it online. But they sort of talked about some of the potential projects they're discussing. So one thing is there a complete recording edition of Islands, which is no surprise because it's the next record after Lizard. Now, I do have the 40th anniversary edition of Islands, but it's maybe my least favorite of the King Crimson records. Like, that's never been an album that's sort of really like jumped out at me. Like, if I want to hear King Crimson, I'll pick just about any other album over that one. I think Ladies of the Road is a pretty cool track, but other than that, So
I like Sailor's Tale. I think every Crimson fan loves Sailor's Tale, but that's about the only one. Now, not to interrupt you, but that band, that was the first live King Crimson since the original King Crimson. And Fripp kind of spitefully put out that Earthbound album, which is not a very good sounding record at all. But there are fantastic recordings of that 1971 lineup, and they were great live. So while I would be hesitant to purchase a complete recording sessions edition of Islands, like that might be one too far for me. If there was some sort of 1971 live material mixed in multi-channel, I might go for it.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe like, who knows, the updated surround mix in 5.1 Atmos will be revelatory compared to the original 09 version, but it's never been an album that's like, a particular favorite of mine. So I don't know if that's one I'll go for. But perhaps the more exciting news was that they mentioned that they're considering having a Steven Wilson mix of Thrak. Which, as you know, the original, it's not a 40th anniversary edition, but the first 5.1 remix of Thrak was done by, is it Jacko or Jocko? How you say it?
Jocko Jaksic, who was the singer and guitar player for the final King Crimson incarnation.
Yeah, so he had done the original 5.1 mix with Robert Fripp. And I mean, it's not an album I know particularly well, but I think that's a pretty cool surround mix, and it's a great album. Like, it's kind of sort of a continuation of the 80s stuff, certainly in the sense that Adrian Belew was still involved, but it is different. It's heavier.
Have you heard the Dinosaur Circus mashup?
No, but that sounds wild.
Yeah, I thought it was worth mentioning, especially in this video. But no, Thrak would be a fantastic choice, because I don't love the Jaksic surround mix of that. And because to me Thrak is like, let's take the 80s King Crimson and merge it with like the mid 70s John Wetton era King Crimson, like the Red era King Crimson. And the original mix of it was a little bit loudness war affected. It's kind of like heavy-handed mastering wise and kind of distorts. And then when we got to the Jocko Jaksic mix of it, it was too far in the other direction for me. Like, it kind of lost its power, and like a lot of the guitars especially were underserved. We got lots of drums because of course you're dealing with two drummers here, two drum sets. But it would be just a fantastic Atmos mix experience, I think, to have that double trio mixed all around you.
Yeah, I wonder like what you would do with that in Atmos, because the theory of the 5.1 mix was like one drummer in front of you, one behind you, which I think that was a brilliant idea. So like in Atmos, what is it, like one drummer on the bottom, one on the top? I think that would be kind of silly, but I wonder what if it ends up being one of a Steven mix. I wonder how he'll approach that. So that will be interesting. But as I said in my review, the one I would pick would be Discipline. to get an Atmos mix,
Yeah.
or really the whole '80s trilogy for that matter. But Discipline is my favorite of the three.
Yeah, it's mine as well. And I think if they did the 80s trilogy and did them in a box like this, that would be great. You know, just do them all in one go, do the complete recording sessions. I listened to Discipline yesterday and kind of like not necessarily in preparation, but I just hadn't heard it in a while. And it is my favorite King Crimson album. And that 2011 mix of Discipline still holds up.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest ever. And so I don't know what really more he could do with it because there's already lots of stuff being flown around and panned. But hey, you know, I've been so impressed by like what he's done with Lizard, Red, In the Court, Lark Songs and Aspects. So, you know, I'd be all over a Discipline Atmos mix.
It's actually like when you think about it, the music sounds very complex, but I don't think those recordings are that dense.
No.
Like it's kind of, you've got Bruford's drums, you've got Tony Levin playing the stick, and then you have the two guitars, right? Fripp and Blue. And then some of the songs have backing vocals and things, but the 5.1 mix is usually just kind of, you know, Adrian's guitar in front, Fripp in the back, or vice versa. And because of like the sort of interlocking parts, like on a song like Frame by Frame, it sounds very big.
Mm-hmm.
But there aren't really, like, I would guess, I don't know what's on the tapes, but I would guess there aren't as many available elements on that as there are even on an older album like Lizard.
Well, I could tell you there are no overdubs on those albums. Maybe on 3 of a Perfect Pair, but the first two, Discipline and Beat, were recorded live in the studio. And that's something that Fripp was adamant about, was we have to be able to reproduce this material live. So they recorded it live. And I think the only thing that really counts as an overdub are probably the vocals.
Yes.
So, you know, it's like a live record in the studio. That's one of the things that makes it so special. Now, 3 of a Perfect Pair, I think, is a different story. I think it was more constructed. It took like a year to put together.
I would say, speaking specifically about Discipline, the tracks I would expect to have the most impressive Atmos effect would be like the more ambient kind of ones, like Sheltering Sky, or even like even something like Mate Kudasai. Like you can picture totally like the seagull guitar coming out of the ceiling. I think that would be super cool. There's also just a lot of reverb on those tracks you could use to spread up into the height speakers. So, and the only knock I would have against the 2011 mix of Discipline, and I learned this recently because I found an original LP of Discipline, is that there is a guitar part that was removed from Mate Kudasai. There's an extra like Frippertronics guitar. On the original vinyl that's not on the Steven Wilson mixes.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if that was like something like Robert Fripp wanted it to be removed or there was some other reason, but it would be a good opportunity to put that back in because that is a cool kind of textural part. Maybe it could go in the height speakers.
Well, that'd be the perfect place for it. But I remember reading about that now that you just triggered a memory from when me and Mike did our King Crimson ranking video, that was the one instance where they broke their overdub rule, was on Mate Kudasai. And I think that when they got to the 2011 mixes, Fripp said, take it out. I was never that comfortable with it. It doesn't fit what we were going for. I'm pretty sure. I'll have to check and make sure that my history is correct. But when you said that, it's like, oh, I remember reading about that in the box set because I'm one of those crazy people who bought the 80s box. That was one of the first box sets I ever bought. So the only one I would add is Starless and Bible Black. And
I think they kind of have to do it to complete this sort of trilogy, right?
The only downside I think is that there are no recording sessions. I mean, there's probably some like overdub sessions, and
I think there's 2 up mixes on the original 5.1 Fracture, and what was the other song's called, like Trio or something like that. It's one of those improv tracks.
Yeah, the one that Bill Bruford's credited with writing because he didn't play on it.
And I guess the last thing I would add is it would be nice if they would do like a standalone version of In the Court, the Atmos mix, because I think probably a lot of people passed on that because they had either one or both of the prior versions that didn't go for the big 69 box. But that is a really great Atmos mix. particularly the kind of more melodic pieces, like I Talk to the Wind
Hmm.
and Moonchild, sound amazing in
Yes, they
Atmos.
do.
So
I just
it
listened to
would.
that last night. It's a phenomenal Atmos mix.
So I think more people need to hear that. So it would
Yes.
be great if they could do, I guess, like a complete recordings edition. Frankly, like this is sort of me pushing my own agenda, but it would be great if they could just do like a download of it. That would be
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, that'd be a big album for you guys too. But the only other thing I was going to say about Starless is that if they were to do a complete recording sessions edition of that, they would be including the Night Watch concert, which is, I think, on the Starless box set. And there is, I think, a complete 5.1 mix of that on the Starless box, which I don't have. So that would be kind of cool if they kind of like packaged it as, let's do the Starless and Bible Black album. Maybe we'll include some of the studio overdub sessions in there. And oh, by the way, we're going to put the entire Night Watch Amsterdam performance on it.
Yeah, I'm like pretty oblivious to what is on those prior box sets that came out in tandem with the 40th anniversary. I'm pretty sure in this there was a Thrack box as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
And
there
I
was.
think in the Thrack box there's a 5.1 mix of a live show.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be if they wanted to have Steven remix the live show, or if they wanted to just include the previous mix from the prior edition, that would be a good thing to throw in if they're doing another Thrack reissue.
Yeah. That would be a big deal for me because I missed that Starless box set. And it's honestly like everybody who I know who has it says it's one of the very best Crimson sets ever. So yeah, that would be great. Personally, more live multi-channel stuff in these
But
sets.
I keep thinking like they must be running out of material at this point. But they somehow they keep managing to find new stuff.
Yep. And as you famously say, long may they continue.
Yes, indeed.
Well, Jonathan, I want to thank you for joining me today. This has been lots of fun.
Of
For
course.
those folks who are watching at home, don't forget to leave us a comment. What would you like to see next in this series? Is there anything that you're really excited about in the King Crimson Complete Recording Sessions Atmos Edition series? If you've heard the Lizard and In the Wake of Poseidon albums, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. How do they compare to you to the earlier versions? We'd love to get a dialogue started. And as always, don't forget also to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Jonathan and I are going to be talking about the Doors set soon. Maybe we might talk some Jimi Hendrix soon. And we're also going to do a very special conversation, I think probably next. And we're going to be picking apart your work on Christopher Holt's, what is that? Across the Universe is the name of that thing?
Across the Milky Way.
Across the Milky Way. We're going to be talking about that album, which you've just mixed, and it came out on October 31st. So we're going to get this is probably going to be the next thing we do. So maybe look for it in about a week's time, but we're going to be breaking down Jonathan's work on his Atmos mix project. So that's going to be cool. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, if you're watching this and you've ever wondered like what goes on behind the scenes and how you actually do an Atmos mix, at least how I did it, everybody kind of has a different process. But yeah, I think it's definitely a video for you if you're interested in kind of what happens in the background.
All right, man. Well, thanks again, and you'll hear from me real soon. Bye-bye.
Same to you.